She brands him toxic, a label he reflects back at her with a chilling lack of self-awareness during their volatile confrontations. He recounts a time when she allegedly struck him with force, leading him to admit he was foolish enough to retaliate in kind. This is Juan Gastelum, an obsessive former lover who mistakenly believes his jealous fury went unnoticed by investigators. The detective suggests he was merely trying to provoke jealousy, but the reality is far darker, as he sees through the smooth talk to identify an abusive stalker. Juan remains dangerously confident, boasting about his habit of erasing digital evidence and inviting the police to search his device. He is blissfully unaware that the reality of his situation is about to collapse, because deleted data often leaves a permanent trail for those who know where to look. At exactly 10:30 in the morning on March 4, 2022, law enforcement in Moses Lake, Washington, arrived for a welfare check on a 30-year-old mother of 3 named Yanira Cedillos. Yanira had recently moved into her own apartment to escape a destructive cycle of domestic violence, seeking a fresh start for her family. When she failed to appear for work on her 30th birthday, her relatives raised the alarm, finding her vehicle abandoned and her phone ominously silent. Investigators immediately focused on 27-year-old Juan Gastelum, an estranged boyfriend who had been calling her incessantly that night. As the investigation intensifies, detectives sit Juan down to verify the timeline of his story and ensure every detail is documented for the record. The officer confirms that March 3rd was her birthday and asks for the correct spelling of the name, Yaniracedillos. Juan explains that he arrived late because she believed he was out of town, a ruse he created to spark jealousy by pretending he was on a distant vacation. He estimates the time of his arrival was roughly 10 or 11 at night, noting it was around the same time she was seen at a local establishment called Papa's. He claims he spent the entire day at the cinema, waiting for her to finish her own plans before he revealed his surprise visit. He suspected she was already intoxicated because her behavior was erratic, shifting from singing over the phone to abruptly hanging up on him. When asked for the exact time he departed from Hermiston to head toward Moses Lake, Juan struggles to provide a precise answer. He eventually suggests he left around 9:30 or 10 in the evening, noting the drive typically takes about 1 hour and 40 minutes, depending on fuel stops. Upon entering Moses Lake, he claims he went directly to her location because she was crying over a heated argument with a friend named Anna. He describes finding her wandering behind a Petco store near a dumpster by the Walmart parking lot, claiming she was walking alone in the dark. To those who knew Yanira, this surprise visit was the fulfillment of their deepest fears regarding Juan's obsessive behavior. Friends like Martín Escobedo would later reveal that Juan had been digitally stalking her throughout the night, monitoring her social media updates to track her companions. Another friend, Javier Perez, recalled the possessive rage in Juan's voice, describing his behavior as psychotic rather than celebratory. He wasn't there to honor her birthday, but to extinguish her newfound independence as she struggled to find her car keys and debit card. Juan claims he took charge, refusing to let her drive in her intoxicated state and insisting on escorting her home personally. He describes a phone call that allegedly took place shortly after she entered his vehicle, a moment that would become a focal point for investigators. A man called asking for Anna, prompting Juan to assert his dominance by shouting that he was the man in the car before the line was disconnected. When he questioned her about the caller, she identified him as a mechanic who had previously helped her with vehicle repairs involving her axles. The conversation then shifted back to her deep hurt over Anna's perceived betrayal on her 30th birthday. The detective asks if any other messages or calls were received during that time, but Juan insists there were none. He paints a picture of a peaceful reconciliation, claiming they walked hand in hand toward her apartment while sharing hugs and kisses. Inside the residence, he says she became emotional again, crying in his arms while expressing her desire for a humiliating apology from Anna. Juan claims he attempted to comfort her, while also criticizing her choice of friends, noting that her reaction might have been fueled by her level of intoxication. He alleges that she told him he could leave, just like everyone else had, expressing a deep sense of abandonment and despair. Their 2-year relationship was less of a romance and more of a countdown to tragedy, with Janita even hiding a restraining order in her car. The detective attempts to summarize the events to ensure mutual understanding, acknowledging Juan's outward displays of love and concern. Juan reinforces his supposed devotion, stating that everyone should be able to see how much he cares for her and her family. In a moment of supposed honesty, he admits that they engaged in sexual activity that night, a detail he claims he was initially too embarrassed to share. The investigator accepts this admission, noting that such intimate details are necessary for a complete understanding of the timeline. Juan claims he was bewildered by reports of his own abusiveness, insisting that no one truly saw what happened behind closed doors. He points to scars and scratch marks on his own body, framing himself as the victim of her physical aggression during their disputes. He confesses to hitting her with his shoes in a moment of stupidity, attempting to rationalize it as a reaction to her own alleged behavior. While admitting to swinging at her neck in the past, he maintains the facade of a man who truly loves and cares for the woman he is accused of harming. The detective expresses his difficulty in reconciling Juan's version of events with the reality of her disappearance and the needs of her family. Information gathered from friends and family paints a vastly different picture of that night than the one Juan is currently providing. Juan suggests that she told her family one thing, while her private text messages would reveal a completely different, more loving dynamic. He insists she was his best friend and confidant, a woman who would cry to him and show a side of herself that no one else ever saw. He compares their bond to his relationship with his former partner, asserting that they shared a deep and unique connection. According to his narrative, she was always the one seeking him out, regardless of how intense their arguments became. The investigator remains professional, reminding Juan that the investigation is purely based on the facts and his role as the last person to see her. Being the final point of contact makes him the primary focus of the inquiry, especially given the conflicting accounts of the evening. The detective challenges Juan's definition of love, suggesting that the affection he describes was overshadowed by a much darker reality. While he may have intended to surprise her for her birthday, the authorities believe his motives were rooted in jealousy rather than romance. It is suggested that his plan to make her jealous backfired, fueling a rage when he realized she was moving on with other people. Juan admits he wanted to intercede in her plans, a confession that the detective uses to dismantle his lover boy persona. A witness named Javier Perez provides a terrifying counterpoint, describing how Janita sounded during a phone call while Juan was present. She didn't sound happy. She sounded angry, breathless, and exhausted, as if she had been running for her life. She had pleaded for someone to pick her up, stating she was frightened in the dark near the Walmart, contradicting Juan's story of a peaceful walk. He emphasizes the man's tone was intensely aggressive, matching the frantic rhythm of Yanira's labored breathing during those final moments. During a second communication, she claimed to be safe with someone who had picked her up, yet her voice sounded hollow and unrecognizable to those who knew her. Javier initially assumed she was simply resolving issues with a former partner, unaware of the terror unfolding. While Juan paints a scene of intimacy, Javier describes a woman running for her life. The mystery deepens as Martin Escobedo names Alexis, the man who had accompanied Janita that fateful evening. Martin notes they were capturing memories on social media, images that Juan likely monitored with growing resentment from a distance. Though he had never met the man known as Johnny, Martin recalls the night began with an atmosphere of celebration and shared drinks. The group was immersed in the festivities, enjoying a series of rounds and the company of one another. The mood shifted outside the establishment when a dispute erupted over her ability to drive, leading Yanita to vanish into the darkness. Martin clarifies that this was Yanita's first time spending time with Alexis, an invitation she had extended herself. This social interaction provided the spark for Juan's 3-hour journey, a mission fueled by the digital proof of her independence. The detective shifts his strategy, reminding the suspect that the truth is his only remaining ally in this investigation. He stresses that every word is vital for providing the family with the closure they desperately seek regarding her safety. A chilling revelation is made as the officer mentions that a forensics team is already meticulously processing the apartment for evidence. He offers one final opportunity to correct the record before the physical evidence tells its own indisputable story. Juan attempts to add a touch of domesticity, claiming he tried to prepare a bath for her, but she was too exhausted to accept. He maintains that this was the extent of their interaction before he eventually decided to depart. When questioned about sounds of a struggle, Juan deflects by suggesting the noise was merely the headboard striking the wall during their intimacy. He admits they argued about the volume of their voices, fearing the neighbors might once again be disturbed by their presence. He flatly denies that any objects were thrown, while the detective confirms the residence is located on the 2nd level. Juan meticulously points out where she had placed her personal belongings, including her purse and mobile device, on the bed. He describes her behavior as restless, repeatedly checking her phone while ruminating on her grievances with Anna. He claims their final moments involved a hug near the exit, projecting an image of a peaceful and loving farewell. As he descended the stairs, he insists he heard the distinct sound of the door being locked behind him from the inside. After a final kiss, he walked away, leaving her alone in the apartment. The detective asks if anyone else was present. Juan confirms they were alone, unaware that his persona is rapidly eroding under the weight of professional scrutiny. The detective questions why his vehicle remained in the vicinity. Juan claims he was simply distracted by his digital music library. He explains his preference for using the phone's speaker, necessitating a moment to reconnect his wireless audio system. He insists his stay was brief, lasting only a minute or two, driven by a desire to ensure she didn't leave in her state of distress. He denies ever leaving the safety of his vehicle or wandering through the surrounding apartment complex. He recalls seeing a familiar figure, a local resident known for his early morning walks, but nothing else out of the ordinary. To him, the man appeared harmless, likely just maintaining a fitness routine as the sun began to rise. Juan reiterates that no other vehicles or individuals caught his eye, as his focus was entirely on her potential departure. He mentions her anxiety over a lost debit card, a minor detail in a night that was spiraling toward a much darker conclusion. He claims he offered words of comfort, suggesting she contact the establishment in the morning to retrieve her lost property. The conversation turns to the history of her employment and the evolution of her complicated friendship with Anna. After moving to Moses Lake, the two women began working at the same medical facility, which solidified their social bond. They frequently gathered for drinks and socialized as a group, a friendship that spanned roughly 2 years. The investigator asks if such intense physical altercations were common, but Juan claims to be shocked by the sudden conflict. He recounts her derogatory comments about Anna, painting her friend as someone who becomes volatile under the influence of alcohol. He expresses disbelief at the breakdown of their friendship before the detective shifts the focus back to the logistics of the apartment keys. Juan believes she possessed only a single key to the residence, though he acknowledges she had multiple sets for her vehicle. He maintains he saw no one else on the staircase and asks the detective to believe that the apartment was plunged into darkness as he left. He claims she was diligent about turning off the lights, a habit she maintained even on that final night. While Juan describes her settling in for sleep, surveillance footage from a local gas station captures him disposing of a bag near a dumpster. He was discarding evidence of a violent struggle, including bedding and bloodied clothes. When asked for his theory on her disappearance, Juan attempts to cast suspicion on the father of her children, citing past threats. He details a history of intimidation, where the individual allegedly threatened her family members and children. He quickly dismisses his own theory, noting the man's lack of transportation and his struggles with substance abuse. He tosses out various scenarios, including the possibility that she walked to a friend's house or simply chose to vanish on her own. He argues that her continued silence is out of character, as she usually makes contact even when she is deeply frustrated with him. He claims he has been reaching out without success, suspecting that she may have blocked his number entirely. He claims to have reached out to her multiple times that day, only to find that his calls were being diverted directly to her automated greeting. Juan admits to a compulsive habit of erasing his digital history, a behavior he developed during past instances of infidelity with other women. When the detective asks if he believes she is deceased, he expresses a hollow hope for her safety, while confessing that the possibility has begun to haunt his thoughts. His mind wanders to a darker scenario, where she might be with another man, mentioning a guy named Johnny, with whom she allegedly planned a romantic encounter. He recalls her return from Atlanta and how he asserted his possessiveness, maintaining that she had no enemies who would wish her physical harm. The only person he can think of with a motive for violence is the father of her children, whom he claims has a history of making lethal threats. He insists that she was not the type to initiate physical conflict unless she was provoked into a verbal confrontation. When asked for a specific name, he identifies the individual as Luis, though he struggles to recall the man's family name. He acknowledges that despite not owning a vehicle, Luis had the connections necessary to find transportation to her location. Juan attempts to frame himself as a protector, recounting a time he contacted the authorities because he feared she was going to confront the volatile individual. He details an incident involving the Wash Police Department, where he requested an escort to prevent a potential tragedy. He paints a picture of a man fueled by narcotics and irrational rage, someone who was known to fight with law enforcement, even under the duress of a taser. The investigator gently probes into Juan's own past, asking if a former partner might have targeted him, but he reveals that the mother of his child has passed away. He admits that he projected the trauma of his late partner's betrayal onto Yanira, a burden of jealousy and suspicion that she never deserved to carry. The physical evidence inside the apartment told a far more violent story, including a hole in a bedroom door where her head had likely been slammed. Furthermore, forensic recovery of his mobile device revealed images of Yanira showing severe bruising and early signs of death by 3:43 in the morning. These chilling photographs suggested that her life was extinguished through blunt force trauma or manual strangulation long before he supposedly left her alone. The detective asks if her phone contains any secrets, and Juan mentions a strange interaction with a service provider regarding account access. He suspected her of trying to disconnect his service and describes a conversation about potential fraud that occurred the following morning. He claims he provided her number to the technician, believing at the time that she was simply lashing out at him through their shared billing plan. He maintains that the authorities will find nothing more than his typical pattern of incessant messaging and desperate attempts to reach her. The investigator mentions a shift in tactics to expedite the data retrieval process, noting that the technology requires a significant amount of time to process. The room feels heavy with the weight of the interrogation as the officer opens the door to allow for better ventilation. In a final attempt to appear sentimental, Juan mentions a silver necklace she gifted him for Valentine's Day, currently inside his vehicle. The digital trail led search teams to the desolate sand dunes near Moses Lake, where tower pings placed his phone during the hours he claimed to be asleep. After 2 months of searching through the brush, investigators finally discovered her hidden remains. On March 3, 2026, after years of legal maneuvers and delays, Juan Gastelum finally stood before a judge in Grant County. He entered a guilty plea to murder in the second degree with a sexual motivation enhancement, facing a maximum sentence of life in prison. Yanita was a vibrant soul and a dedicated mother whose future was stolen on the very day she turned 30. This concludes our investigation into the case of the man who thought he could hide the truth behind a mask of love.